Hi, I'm Vic Perri and welcome to another edition of Face to Face on Ben TV. Tonight we're talking to writer, researcher, lecturer, consultant in issues of cultural diversity, gender diversity, sexual diversity, HIV AIDS and social diversity in health and education. Quite a mouthful. And we're talking to Dr. Maria Pallotta-Chiarolli. Welcome to the program, Maria.
Hi Vic, thank you. I bet you the biggest mouthful is my name in that lot.
Name. I practiced a lot this morning to say it, actually. That's a lot of skills. How did you fit all that in?
Well, it's been over 20 years I've been doing this work, so I'm nearly 45, so it's a lot of years of experience in, first of all, training up, learning all the stuff, learning how to do research, working with amazing people in various communities, so it's been great. And also my upbringing, you know. I often say that my parents were my first social deconstructionists. They taught me how to deconstruct politics, church, law. So I guess it's been, personally and professionally, it's been 45 years of it.
So that would have been inspiring. Tell us a bit about your background.
Oh, well, I guess for some people it would be your typical migrant WOG, working class background. My parents came from a very poor village in southern Italy, very much controlled by the church and Mussolini, so fascism and the church were very much linked. So they were very oppressed and they came to Australia to get away from that. I had a very strong feminist mother, a very sensitive and loving dad, and I wrote about them in Tapestry, and they taught me from the beginning that you just don't accept institutional laws and church or anything like that, and anybody who has stereotypes about you. Get out there and you work and you make change, and they taught me also to respect diversity, which was great. Even though everybody else in Australia thought that my dad was beating me up and that I wasn't allowed to go to school and that I was a little migrant girl being subjugated. Well, that wasn't the case.
These were assumptions that people had just because your parents had quite liberal attitudes.
Yeah, and also the family. You know, I didn't have a nuclear family. I was brought up by mum, dad, grandparents, godparents. My favourite auntie and uncle, who I lived with most days anyway, because my auntie wanted to stay home and be an Australian housewife while my mother wanted to go out and work. And so it was great. My first 5 years were absolutely wonderful. Then I got to school in grade 1, or because we couldn't afford kindy or anything like that. So in 1965 I hit grade 1 with no English, and suddenly found out that the big world out there thought that my parents were negligent and my family was problematic, and because I was an active girl who was apparently tomboyish, they thought that I was very wrong and I couldn't speak English, and what I ate and what I did and what I believed in, and the fact that I laughed in RE classes.
But what's this is in Adelaide?
Yeah, I grew up in Adelaide.
So the school that you went to, there weren't any other Italian kids?
There was one other little Italian kid, and his name was Nicky, so I still remember. And he and I were put at the back of the class, basically. And he made a big mistake, and you'll understand this as an Italian boy, or we were an Italian boy. He didn't understand when they told us in English where the toilets were, so he suddenly peed his pants. And the boys let him have it for the rest of the year and the rest of his primary school days. So we went through some pretty tough stuff. But gee, you learnt. And you also learnt that people had images of you that weren't what you were really like. And I think it was great to learn
that. And that sort of anecdote, I suppose, has stuck with you because it sort of inspires you a bit in the work that you're doing now in terms of raising awareness around the sort of cultural issues that people are dealing with.
Absolutely.
In order for and raising awareness in order for Anglos to understand, I suppose.
Yeah, like there's interesting parallels between all prejudices and all stereotypes, and racism and sexism and homophobia, heterosexism. They're all actually linked to ignorance, prejudice, assumptions that people make, and people being afraid of change. So coming from a background which was very marginal back then, I mean, hey, it's pretty trendy to be a WOG now, you know, as my dad says, the weeds that he was pulling out on the footpath 30 years ago, and all the Anglos would go, oh my God, look at that funny WOG man eating weeds, are the rocket that you pay $20 for now in a restaurant. So social change has happened. But those kinds of experiences. And also my parents were not ever homophobic, but hey, schools never asked ethnic parents what they thought of sexual diversity. So all those kinds of experiences, and also my parents teaching me how to deconstruct words and who's in power and why do they say what they do. All those skills have really come together for this. So when I do work around same-sex families or homophobia, I think back and think, well, I've had experiences of those marginalities, not exactly the same, but they've stood with me all the way. So for me, all those issues are really interconnected.
They are. And your work at, well, you're at Deakin University now. What do you do there?
I'm a senior lecturer, well that sounds really posh, in the School of Health and Social Development. So I teach in all these areas. I've got some great undergrad students and some brilliant PhD students doing some great work, and it's just a real joy to see, without sounding ageist, some young people taking a lot of this stuff up, and they're going to go with it, and that gives me hope for the future, despite what's going on right now politically.
And what's Deakin University like, actually? The culture there is pretty good to,
I can only
to
speak
do the
about,
sort of stuff that you want to do?
I can only speak about my school, and I've had a lot of support just to get on and do my own thing. Remember, academia is in a lot of strife at the moment. Federally we're being defunded. It's become a kind of corporate bureaucracy where you all have to have business plans, But my school luckily still lets me produce the kind of work that I want to produce, which is, and it's my feminist research ethics going back to the 1980s, which is you produce material that's accessible, useful, that people that you're writing about can actually read. I mean, I can produce the academic, I won't be rude, academic stuff that 3 or 4 people read in a journal, but for me it's really important to use my power in an institution like that to do work and to be an activist and get my stuff out there for people to use themselves in their own settings. So.
Well, tell us some of the books. You've written a number of books now. Tell us some of the books that you've written.
I've written 2 books which were quite autobiographical, sort of novels, so I'm also a bit of an author. I try to use creative writing as well. My first book ever, which I hope you don't mind me mentioning, because it's raising money for the Bobby Goldsmith Foundation for people living with AIDS, and for me that's really important, so I'll promote that forever, is Someone You Know. That was my first novel, and that was about a dear friend of mine who was living with HIV and eventually died with an AIDS-related illness. He was a gay teacher in a Catholic boys' school in Adelaide, and he basically, I think, apart from my family background, he basically started me off on all this stuff. He used to say to me things like, when are you going to go back and study the kinds of stuff that you're talking about? Get some letters behind your name, so that you can do this. And one day when I'm gone, because he was quite closeted about HIV back in the late 80s and being in a Catholic boys' school as a gay teacher back then, he never wrote very much or said very much about himself until after he had died. He said to me, you're going to write this stuff and you're going to do it. And I did, and I think that started me off. So that's the first one, and then there was another one called
that book, is that
I forgot to give its name.
Picked up by schools or places? Yeah,
it did, and that was wonderful. It was called Someone You Know. It's still out there. It's been reprinted as a new edition.
Right.
And it's being used in a lot of schools. It was used a lot in the early 90s in particular to break down a lot of the stigma and discrimination around HIV.
And the title, Someone You Know,
Someone
is that
You Know.
sort of a reference that could be anyone?
Absolutely,
that a lot of people may know someone with HIV without even knowing it.
And that your teacher could be gay, and that, these could be people in your family. But the other thing is that he said to me when he was very sick and we went for his test, he said, one day when I'm gone, and I'm going to cry right now, it doesn't matter if I cry on camera, I am a wog chick after all. So, he said to me after I'm gone, I want you to write about this because it could be about someone they know, and it could be someone you know. So I thought, that's going to be the title one day. So.
And your next book?
Then there was Tapestry, which was 5 generations in my family, and it was I went back and did all the ethnographic sociological research on 5 generations, particularly of women in my family, trying to trace why I've got such values and beliefs and why I feel so strong about feminism and a whole lot of issues. And I went back and looked at, my goodness, there's some interesting links between all the different women in my family over 5 generations and how they all fought for basic things like to get an education or to marry who they loved or to be able to go to work and not raise their kids at home if they didn't want to do that. And also I realised that some of the men in my family were actually quite before their time around issues of masculinity, especially Italian macho masculinity. I mean, my dad is the kind of man who would cry and laugh and be affectionate, and my grandfather was a pacifist and got imprisoned during World War I because he didn't want to fight the war, and then, so I had this history of people always somehow being on the edge of stuff. So when you grow up with all those stories, you can't just help but see things quite differently from most people in the world.
It seems a natural precursor to your work in studying diverse sexuality
yeah. I mean,
and gender.
Yeah,
So,
I mean, you just reminded me. I mean, I was 13, and those of us who are from our generation will remember this. I was 13, and we were watching Number 96 in the box at home.
Right.
We had just got a TV only 2 years before. So in my family, there was no censorship. We'd watch Number 96, and there were some gay characters on Number 96 in the box, and my parents would be speaking really openly about it. And,
they were fine.
They were fine. So by the time I was 16, gay friends were coming over, transgender friends were coming over, and Mum and Dad were, oh yeah, great, here's some wine, here's some homemade food. It wasn't an issue. And yet that's the kind of, it's so against the stereotype of migrant families, and that was
yes,
hard.
it certainly wasn't like my home, not at all. What else? What other books?
2 beautiful books. One of them I did with a dear friend of mine called Wayne Martino, who's a lecturer at Murdoch Uni, but he's about to go to the University of Western Ontario, which is great. Okay. We did Boy Stuff together, which was a collection of young men's stories and boys' stories around their family, their sexualities, their lives, how they feel about growing up as a boy in Australia. And Girls Talk I had done a bit earlier, which was a collection of young women talking about their lives, providing cartoons, photos. And for me, it's always about diversity. Yep. And getting like sexually diverse girls, girls from diverse cultural backgrounds, girls with various disabilities, all to talk about issues like family, friendship, sex, health, school, those things. So those 2 books were gorgeous to design and to work with these young people to get their stories out there, to break some of the myths about themselves as well.
Yeah, and it was easy to find these people?
Because I've been working with schools for a long time, and words get around. So girls were a lot easier actually, because often you'd go to a school and go, okay, I need some young women who'd like to write about life and love and sex, and they'd go, yeah, me. Go to boys' schools or work with boys, and they'd be like, oh, can't talk to me about this stuff. But then at night, I learned to put my mobile number and email address on on whiteboards, and that night you'd get boys often ringing up Wayne and myself and going, I couldn't tell you because all my mates are there, but listen, can I write this, and I've got something to say, but don't use my name because I'll get hassled at school. And the gender stuff
is different, isn't it? Yeah.
Very different, especially around the homophobia. So yeah.
We'll talk more about that straight after this break. You're watching Face to Face, and don't go away. We'll be straight after these announcements. And welcome back to Face to Face. I'm Vic Perri. I'm talking to Dr. Maria Pallotta-Chiarolli. Welcome back.
Thank you.
Now, we were talking about some of the research you've done and the books that you've written. Now, the latest book, and we'll talk a bit about this, when our children come out, and this is something that is out now.
Yes, it's been out for about a month or so it's fantastic. Yeah, I'm really proud of that book, Vic.
And how did this come about?
Well, it's been in the process for 3 years, and what I wanted to do, because I've been out in schools for so often, I've been working with many parents, gorgeous parents from PFLAG, for example, like Nan McGregor and Molly Smith in Sydney, and I wanted to document the important work that parents can do and are doing to support their GLBT children. I also wanted to show people that there are some great teachers out there who are doing really good work in schools, great youth workers. So I wanted a book that was uplifting. It wasn't this kind of, old standard, how do you cope with having a gay child, as if having a gay child is this huge problem. I wanted a book that said, why does society make you feel like there's something wrong if you've got a gay or lesbian or bisexual or transgender child, and what can you do about it? So again, it was this whole process of lots of interviews, working with youth groups, with people like Daniel Whithouse and a whole range of people who've gone out there and done some great work. Kenton Miller's cartoons are just fantastic. They add that funky edge to the book, which is really good. And I wanted it to be really accessible and a lot of fun, as well as really serious, because there's some really horrible stuff that young people are still going through in their families.
What are some of the issues? And personally, I can talk about some stuff as well, but...
well, you're in there, Vic.
Well, yeah, I am. But there are still some of those issues that have been around for years. They still do happen, don't they?
Yeah.
Perhaps less so. But what are some of the things that, for instance, young kids from Italian or Greek or even Asian background go through? What are they?
Well, it was interesting because no matter what background, I mean, there's a lot of kids in that book and also a lot of parents from Anglo-Australian backgrounds. So there's a lot of parallels between different cultures to different degrees. But for example, a lot of young people feel very scared to come out to their families. And a lot of parents really admitted in this book, you know, that they're often their first reactions are the ones that they regret later. They often become quite selfish reactions such as, where did I go wrong? Maybe it's just a phase. I'm not going to have grandkids. You know, how am I going to keep my head up high in my community or in my church?
What are the relatives going to think?
Yeah, what are the relatives going to think? And, you know, maybe there was something I did wrong when my child was in the womb. Or, you know, one dad said from PFLAG here in Victoria, and he said, in Melbourne, sorry, he said, oh, you know, the first thought was, gee, I should have taken my son to the footy more. I should have made him mow the lawns. And then he looks back and goes,
changed it.
Yeah, and he looks back later and goes, how pathetic was that? So I wanted parents to talk to each other about, okay, you might go through these reactions, but your job is to actually get informed, come to terms with what's going on, support your kids, go to their schools, do all that work. So I wanted community workers, schools, teachers, parents and young people all sharing ideas and information and what you can do to support young people, because it's not their issue. The horrible world out there makes it their issue.
It's not going to change. It's like if a young kid's going to say, you know, I've got these issues, I'm thinking about my sexuality, I think I'm different, just because a parent decides to disapprove, they're not going to change their mind, are they? And if they do, it'll only be because the parents are saying so, and they change their mind, but they won't be true to themselves, will they? They'll be living a lie and to please their parents or community or whatever, and that's the wrong thing to do.
And we had a lot of young people, and even people like Jonathan Jones, who was ordained in the Metropolitan Community Church, saying how some of them, you know, do shut down and go through a lot of mental health, emotional health issues, substance abuse, a whole lot of stuff happens. You know, we can go on and on about the suicide rate here in Australia. You know, there's a whole lot of issues that happen if young people don't get that support. But the other side to this is also that we wanted parents and young people to connect and say, well, you know, it doesn't matter if it is, you know, this whole thing about it's a phase or not a phase. Like, we really tackle that in the book. So what? Like, if a young person is saying, at this moment in my life, I'm same-sex attracted or I'm heterosexually attracted or whatever, it doesn't matter. Honour what that child or that young person is going through right now. Let them explore safely and respectfully and all that sort of stuff, and let them have a good time and just go with them. So we also wanted to tackle this whole thing of, you know, you're either going to be gay or straight. You know, the fact is that many people go through different facets in their lives, and it's okay. It's actually not a problem. So the book actually provides a lot of strategies of, even when someone says to you, you know, in a school, we won't do this work in our school because, you know, the ethnic parents will complain. And, well, go back and say, have you actually talked to any? Have you actually run a parent night? Have you actually found out who's in the community that would support you? Or the other one is, we can't do this work, we can't have this book in the school because parents will complain. Usually, Vic, it's one or two parents.
Right.
We call that the three-parent syndrome, TPS. Most parents will just go, we really want you to do this work. So it's all about saying, challenge these people that come out with these ridiculous excuses because they just don't hold anymore.
So even if there is a majority of parents not wanting that sort of, isn't it sometimes a case of doing the right thing, doing the best thing for the
social
kids?
That's the other one again, and some of it is actually based on my work in schools, where some principals would say to me, because I go around doing all this professional development stuff, some principals will say, well, I'm sorry, we can't really legislate or introduce this into our schools until we have staff consensus. I'm sorry, but I have never been in a staff room, even when I was a teacher in the 80s or since then working with schools, where everybody has agreed on anything that's going to happen in a school.
Exactly.
So why is it with this issue you have to get every single person to agree? Social justice issues around disabilities, sexualities, ethnicities, gender, there's always going to be someone who's going to have a problem with it. But schools push it through. Well, it's about time we push through these issues too.
And is this book, is this being picked up by schools?
Yeah, it is actually. We're getting some really good feedback. A lot of parents from around Australia are getting behind it and working with it. The other thing I'm hearing from wonderful bookshops like Hares and Hyenas and a whole lot of places around Australia is that some young people are buying it to give to their parents, which is a great idea. As one young person says in the book, he says, this is, you know, go home with stuff for your parents and say, right, do your homework before you come out with stupid things about my sexuality. And I love that. I love the fact that young people are empowered to go, Mum, Dad or whoever, do some reading. before you hurt me with anything else. And it's great. So I hope that book's going to be useful like that.
So the details of the launch.
It's on Tuesday, May the 24th, 7:30 at the Toorak Bowls Club. It's where PFLAG has its meetings, and the Toorak Bowls Club is in Mandeville Crescent, just off Malvern Road, between Orong and Kooyong Road. So it's going to be a great night. I think it's going to be more like a party. PFLAG are holding this great party. Lots of people who are in the book are actually going to read parts, like you, are going to say something. My parents, my mum and dad, are coming over from Adelaide for it. So if you're coming to the launch, please stop and say hello to them. They'll be the two older people in their 70s sitting in the chair watching and having fun.
Well, hopefully there'll be a few more people, older people as well.
There will be, I hope, a lot of parents are coming and young people are coming, and beautifully I've heard from some of the young people in this book that some of their families are coming, and it's going to be the first time that their families have actually fronted up to support them in this kind of
fantastic
stuff. So I think it's going to be a really, I hope, really great night. And I just want to thank PFLAG because they've just been fantastic throughout this.
So if people want more details or just want that information again, they can give you a call?
Yep, my office number is 9251 7198, or they can email PFLAG, and it would be great if people did let us know, because there's going to be some great food and catering, and so it's going to be a great
And
night.
they can pick up the book
from most bookshops. I'd recommend, of course, Hares and Hyenas, because Roland Crusader and the team there have just been behind everything that I've ever done, and I just really want to honour that. And they're going to be there that night too, selling the book, and they've got them there. It's great.
That's fantastic. Of course, you can always get more information about it at feedback@bentv.org.au. But before, and we have to finish in a minute, but before we do that, you've also got something else coming up later on, and it's a Schooling and Sexualities Conference. This is later in the year. Tell us a bit about that.
10 years ago, Deakin Uni, Jane Kenway, Catherine Beavis, Louise Lasky and team had this fantastic conference called Schooling and Sexualities. And we decided, Dr. Lisa Hunter from Griffith Uni and I decided that it was time to see where we've been in the last 10 years around these issues, where we need to go, what we need to do. Lots of fantastic people who work in these fields are coming to present, including Dr. James Sears from America, who was one of the pioneers in a lot of this work. So he's coming over from the US to work with us on these issues. It's September the 30th to October the 2nd. At Deakin Uni, and again, by all means, contact me or Bent TV, and there'll be details available. Registrations have now opened. It's going to be a great time.
People can register online.
You can register, download all that stuff and register. But the information's all available. I've got the website for that as well. So.
All right. So your phone numbers again?
9251 7198.
That's all we have time for. Thanks so much, Maria.
No,
that was
thank you,
fantastic.
Vic, and thank everyone.
And you have to be congratulated and admired for doing wonderful work.
I'm just doing my bit. I think if we all did our bit like you are and like this team is, we're going to get there.
Thanks very much, Maria. You've been watching Face to Face. I'm Vic Perri. We'll see you next time.